Welcome, everyone, to today's Explainer. We are taking a deep dive into a truly fascinating text today. We're going to unpack a profound philosophical question that has literally challenged thinkers for centuries. We're exploring the ultimate chicken or egg scenario of human reality. Does the physical world around us shape our minds? Or do our minds actually shape the physical world? The text we're analyzing takes a very firm stance on this. And honestly, the way the author maps out the argument is incredibly structured and thought-provoking. So, let's just dive right into it. The author's central question is a big one. Does existence determine consciousness, or does consciousness determine existence? According to our source material, this isn't just some casual late-night debate, it's the ultimate watershed dividing materialism and idealism. The author points out that humanity still fundamentally struggles to understand this issue. And really, depending on which side of this line you fall on, your entire approach to life, reality, and the future is going to be completely different. Here's our roadmap for today. 1. The core debate. 2. The 5 human tiers. 3. The spark of creation. 4. Shaping our environment. And finally, 5. The future of consciousness. Let's get started. Section 1. The core debate. Materialism versus idealism. So the author begins with a pretty crucial warning. Jumping to conclusions on this topic rashly is just going to cause mental confusion. It's a heavy concept, so it requires a structured approach. He uses 2 competing philosophies as a lens to view the world. On one side, we have existence determines consciousness. That's the materialist view, the idea that the physical world comes first and dictates how we think. On the exact opposite side, we have consciousness determines existence. This is the idealist view that our minds and thoughts come first, effectively birthing the physical reality we experience. The author asserts that to understand why people so passionately defend one side over the other, we have to look at how different people actually interact with the material world. Which brings us to Section 2, the 5 human tiers, a hierarchy of motivation. To explain why people hold such different worldviews, the author divides the entire human population into 5 specific tiers. First up, we have the ignorant. The author argues this group lives purely by survival instinct, basically just grabbing what they need to survive without any deeper thought. Next are the laïties. Their lives are driven by worldly desires. We're talking money, status, power, beauty. The third tier is the mortals. For them, life is completely anchored by affection, family, friends, colleagues, national pride. Without those connections, they'd feel empty. Then we step up to the sages. These are the scientists and philosophers who live by reason, constantly asking why, to understand the essence behind phenomena. And finally, right at the peak, we have the saints or immortals. They rely entirely on spirituality and spiritual perception, finding physical senses totally unimportant. So what does this all mean for our big debate? Well, the author concludes that for the first 3 groups, the ignorant, the ladies, and the mortals, existence absolutely dictates their consciousness. Without the physical world, their desires and connections just collapse. The author actually notes that telling these groups that consciousness determines existence is literally like casting pearls before swine. Sages, on the other hand, see existence and consciousness as equally important. They use existence as a baseline for deep thought. But for the saints, consciousness is the ultimate driver. They know that consciousness dictates existence, and according to the text, they'd view anyone who argues otherwise as ignorant. Moving on to Section 3, the spark of creation, mind before matter. Having established who believes what, the author rolls out his first major batch of evidence to prove that consciousness actually determines existence. And he starts with a very simple, almost playful question. How did cars appear on Earth? Think about it for a second. Cars didn't just naturally grow on trees, so how could they just appear out of thin air? The answer, the author argues, is imagination. Someone had to first imagine a car in their consciousness and then manufacture it based on that mental image. The text applies this to literally everything. Houses didn't just pop up. Someone visualized the structure first. The clothing trends set by fashion designers, they were fully realized in the brain before they ever hit a runway. The author's point here is absolute. Just consider the screen you're looking at right now. If humans had no imagination or consciousness, none of the artificial objects we use today would exist. Mind absolutely must come before matter. Section 4. Shaping our environment, from homes to nations. Shifting the scale from everyday objects up to entire cities and societies, the author draws on his own personal experiences. He spent 10 years in Zimbabwe and made some highly provocative observations during his time there. He argues that Caucasian environments there were consistently clean, orderly, full of neatly mowed lawns and flowers. In stark contrast, he observed that the living environments of his fellow Chinese expatriates were often overgrown, messy, and chaotic. Now, his argument isn't about the physical location itself. Rather, he argues these stark contrasts are physical manifestations of the differing environmental consciousness of the people living there. Basically, a clear internal spatial layout creates an orderly external home. To push this idea even further, the author shares an anecdote about his son visiting New York's Chinatown and finding it surprisingly dirty compared to the rest of the city. This leads the author to a really bold thought experiment. He claims that if the populations of China swapped countries with Japan and Germany, within 50 years, the physical environments of those nations would completely flip to match the ingrained consciousness of their new inhabitants. He argues we aren't victims of our environment at all. Our consciousness creates the environment. The text provides more vast structural examples too. Why do Islamic mosques, Christian churches, and Buddhist temples look so fundamentally different from one another? It's not just a coincidence of available materials. It's because the consciousness of the designers is different. Look at urban planning. The author compares Harare in Zimbabwe, built by the British with strictly separated commercial, industrial, and residential zones, to Beijing, where all these zones are deeply intertwined. A different cultural consciousness directly results in a different physical map. Even the way we dress across different time periods is cited as proof. The author compares the fashion of the Chinese Cultural Revolution, where clothing was restricted to drab yellows, grays, and blues, and individuality was deeply repressed, to the expressive, curvaceous, individualized fashion of modern women today. The author explains that this isn't just an evolution of textiles. No, it is proof that the collective consciousness of a specific era completely dictates its physical style and expression. Then, the author fires off a series of rapid-fire societal questions. Why does the U.S. population grow slower than India's? Why do wealthier, highly educated couples have fewer children than poorer ones? Why do some countries practice monogamy, while others practice polygamy? Why do some political systems limit a president to 2 terms, while others allow indefinite rule? For the author, the answer is always exactly the same. These massive global differences are entirely determined by differing human consciousness. So, the crucial point is summarized in this highly specific question from the text. Why, at the time of his writing, were most Nobel Prize winners Americans, with none from mainland China? The author asks, are Americans just smarter? He says no. He argues it's because their consciousness is different. He uses a great metaphor for this. If you want a hamburger, you don't make noodles. If you want chicken, you don't put pork in the pot. National achievements are the direct, unavoidable result of national consciousness. Section 5. The Future of Consciousness, Expanding the Dimensions. Having laid out all his evidence, the author pivots to the future. He recounts reading a critique of a Chinese college student whose dream was to go to the U.S., build a villa with a green lawn, a pool, and own a Mercedes. The reviewer mocked this student for being unrealistic, accusing him of wishful thinking. But the author fiercely defends the student. He calls the critical reviewer a frog in a well, meaning someone whose vision of the sky is incredibly tiny because they are a complete slave to their current material reality. The author tells the student, visualize it, and your wish will come true. The place you can see in your mind is exactly where you can go. And this leads to his grand conclusion, contrasting conventional and unconventional thinking. If you believe existence determines consciousness, you're using the conventional thinking of instinct-driven animals. You're trapped by your environment, struggling in the pain of reality and confined to just one single Earth. But, and here is the kicker, if you adopt the unconventional thinking of sages and saints, the idea that consciousness determines existence, you break those chains. You can actively open up a sunshine avenue in reality, decipher the mysteries of the universe, and, according to the author, expand your reality into 36-dimensional spaces. Which leaves us with this final, truly profound question from the text. The author insists this isn't just some word game, it dictates your very future. So as you look at your own life, you really have to ask yourself, will you let your current physical reality limit what you believe is possible, remaining a slave to existence? Or will you spread the wings of your imagination, embrace unconventional thinking, and let your consciousness shape a boundless, 3-dimensional future? It's an absolutely fascinating lens through which to view our world. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope it gave you a lot to think about today.